everyone, and welcome to another edition of Moments with MindLeaps. My name is Rebecca Davis, and I'm the founder and executive director of MindLeaps. And I'll say the same thing that I say every Friday, which is that this is my favorite part of my job because I have the chance to have a really interesting conversation with so many different people around the world, including the one who's already joining. Every Friday afternoon as part of this interview series. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know that you're going to be really excited to meet Kiel Majewski. Kiel, hi, how are you?
Hey, doing great. How about you, Rebecca?
Good. You entered just as I was telling our audience how wonderful it is that they're going to hear from Kiel Majewski today. And then here you appear.
Magic. The magic of the internet.
Kiel is the first executive director of Candle's Holocaust Museum in Indiana. And then from there, he's broadened his work into racial justice, remembrance, survivor testimony, Rwanda, and the list goes on and on and on about some of the most important social issues today, and how that weaves into movement building and advocacy work that leads to actual fundamental change. Kiel is one of the persons that I learned the most from in my daily life. And that's why I'm so pleased that he's here today to share his wisdom with all of us. Kiel, thanks for being here.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. And it's not just you and me. I see some friends. I see Bashir showing up down there. I see my guy, Ryan Lammy, Laura Pierce. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks to all the people joining I don't know. Happy to be part of the conversation here.
Well, the very first one to join was my mom. So my mom was, who is this person that you're always telling us about? And now here we go.
Wow. Okay. Pressure is on.
Julia, also thank you for joining all of our friends here. So Kiel, so what's so fascinating to me about your work is that when you go to school as a kid, you're like, oh, this is the Holocaust. And then this is something that we learn in a history book and we close the book and rewrite an exam and we move on with our life. And even this week, it was International Remembrance Day for the Holocaust. And here you've somehow connected to this issue and the broader issues that stem from that and created huge amounts of understanding and awareness in different generations about the Holocaust and what that means for each and every person around the world. I have no idea how you got involved in this line of work and how it's touched your life and now touched many of our lives.
Well, it's kind of serendipitous. I mean, sometimes when I recount this story, I start off by saying, like, of all people, I have no business being in this field because, I'm not Jewish, didn't think I had any ostensible connection to the Holocaust per se. I'm from like West Central Indiana, and there was a Holocaust museum in my hometown founded by a survivor of Auschwitz named Eva Kor. And how she got to Terre Haute is a whole story in and of itself. But when I was at university in my hometown, Indiana State University, go Sycamores, this Holocaust museum unfortunately was firebombed and totally destroyed in an act of hate and intimidation. So I was a history major. I was assigned to be an intern for this Holocaust museum, helping create exhibits when it was being rebuilt. And so that was the way that it kind of pulled me in. And then I also found my own connection in that my grandfather, Bert, who unfortunately died before I was born, he was in the US Army during World War II. And I found out from my dad that he was in a liberating battalion, which means that he was in, a certain division that entered one of the concentration camps at the moment of liberation, help the displaced persons, put their lives back together and all that sort of thing. So just like you're saying with, the textbook understanding of history, I thought that the Holocaust was this chapter that, had the bold names like Hitler, Roosevelt, Churchill, these people. But instead I learned that history is more like a photo mosaic, and the big picture has all of our little pictures in it. And my grandfather's picture was part of the bigger contours of the Holocaust as well. So that made a meaningful connection to me. And I kind of like vowed then that I wanted to help this lady, Eva Kor, create a museum that would last past her generation and past her. So that was my secret mission, and I went to work on that for 10 years, shared an office with her, and really was just the foundational experience of my life, actually.
I've heard Eva speak, I've heard you speak about her, and how fortunate we were to have her as an influencer in our generation. I love this idea about kind of this photo mosaic, and then you found your grandfather there. And so many of like the Holocaust museums do this type of idea where, you know, we collect the photos and we remember this way. And the way that you kind of phrase it in your comment here is like, I think if we all looked at every photo mosaic of every memorial, somewhere actually like each of us is there too. And
Right.
it's not, you know, this one belongs to this part of history, this one belongs to this country. Actually, it belongs to like humanity. And it means that we're both a part of it and we hold responsibility for it.
Exactly. And so, you know, I started off saying like I didn't have any business in this field, but actually this is a field that is everybody's business.
Yeah.
And so that's, you know, a lot of the people, young people that I've worked with, I think a lot of them have felt like I do, that they care, they wanted to do something, but they didn't necessarily see a place for them in this field or in advocacy. And it's really just such an honor and privilege to be able to work alongside young people and encourage them to become part of this as well.
And that's one of the things that I'm like so desperate to ask you about, Kiel, because from candles, an established museum, and mostly because of you and your colleagues who built it to become that landmark. But then you went on to work with Together We Remember, with Carl Wilkins, World Outside My Shoes, and find these other really interesting organizations that are lending their voices and their advocacy tools and their trainings and their experiences to try to like share this knowledge. Maybe you could like highlight some of that work for us, or something that stands out from you in all of these kind of experiences of your developing professional career.
Sure. Well, boy, how do I connect the dots here? Um, I think that when we look at all the people who have been working on this question of never again, you know, this phrase that was uttered after the Holocaust and the UN Convention on Genocide in 1948, you know, we can look at where we are and some of the scary headlines and troubling developments of recent times and think that this has been for naught, you know, that we've been working on this for decades and what progress have we made.
Yeah.
But actually, I would encourage us to look at this promise, this idea of never again, as an intergenerational movement. And we're definitely not there yet, but when we look at the landscape of all the people, the amazing survivors and speakers and upstanders who are visiting schools and classrooms, talking to kids, the governmental agencies, the Atrocities Prevention Board, you know, from the grassroots to the grass tops, there are a lot of the puzzle pieces which exist, but we don't necessarily all see the same puzzle pieces or integrating them together. So that's why an organization like Together We Remember, it's really been meaningful for me to work with David and the Youth Action Fellows and the TWR Coalition, because these are people who are of the same mind, that we have the puzzle pieces we need, and if we can just put them together in the right way, then I really believe we can do the impossible of ending genocide and these sorts of crimes against humanity. Not next year maybe, but what if we looked at 2048, the 100th anniversary of the UN Convention on Genocide? Can we get there by then? Like, what's our moon goal? Let's set a moon goal and go for it.
For those of you who are watching who are not familiar with Together We Remember, you definitely have to check it out. We'll post the link afterwards in this interview. But this is exactly what Kiel is talking about. It's a way to try to piece together parts of the infrastructure that may already exist, but with a particular focus on this youth generation that is going to have to carry that challenge forward. And it would be wonderful the faster it happens, and it happens faster with people like Kiel working on it. So,
well, thanks. I mean, I'm really just, you know, trying to be the guy in the wings helping it along. But just if I could just say, you know, one more articulate thing about Together We Remember, which is that this is essentially a community of survivors of genocide and mass atrocities from across the spectrum of time and space, and their loved ones and their descendants and so forth, uniting across the lines of memory to say that, at bottom we share a common goal of making sure none of this happens to any people, never again for all people.
And I know that this idea of remembrance that we talk about in our country, Kiel, in the United States, often in tandem with this history that we're considering right now together. But a lot of times then we start to like reflect on like, what are the countries, what are the communities that have somehow felt the depth of atrocity and then overcome it into these like beautiful bonds of reconciliation and this hope and this optimism that drives this like vision of the future, right? That things are possible, that we don't have to be lost in our history. We learn and we push forward. And I know that the both of us have drawn a lot of those lessons from Rwanda. And I'm not really sure, Kiel, how you first ended up in Rwanda or how that piece of it ties to the stories that you're sharing with us. And I know so much of kind of your thinking and a lot of us, how we think about what's possible is derived from Rwanda.
Yeah, certainly. Well, how I connected with Rwanda was, I remember hearing about it actually when I was in like fourth grade.
Yeah.
And we, in our elementary school, we got like the little Scholastic Weekly Reader, like a newspaper for elementary school kids.
We got that in Canada too.
Yeah. And I remember my brother, who was a year older than I was, coming home from school and pulling out the Weekly Reader and pointing to like a little column about Hutu people and Tutsi people and talking about, just a massacre that was happening there. And I don't even remember anything more specific about it because I was 10 years old or 9 years old maybe. But it's just interesting to me to think that if a 10-year-old kid in Terre Haute, Indiana knew what was happening, then like, what did world leaders know? What could we have done differently? And so that possibly, put me on some track to answer that question. But then ultimately, I really got involved with Rwanda when I met our mutual friend, hopefully a future guest on Moments with MindLeaps, Carl Wilkins.
We would. That would be the dream guest.
Yeah. So Carl, I became, through my role at Candle's Holocaust Museum, I applied for and was accepted into this fellowship called the Carl Wilkins Fellowship, which our venerable host, ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca Davis, was also a Carl Wilkins Fellow. Ta-da! And that's how I met Rebecca as well. But so this was the inaugural year, Rebecca, when we all went to DC, and it was like, a Friday night or something like that. And we went to this like club for a reception, and at the club were Carl and Teresa Wilkins.
Oh.
And I had only Googled him up to that point. I thought this guy must be like the most, like hoity-toity, like, government official, like, strong guy. And he turns out to be like so down to earth, so kind and warm and stuff like that. And that was somehow, I don't know, I associated Rwanda with how Carl is. And I think Carl has been shaped a lot by Rwanda. And then, through the my role with the Holocaust Museum, I was part of the Kwibuka 20, the 20th anniversary commemorations of the genocide in 2014. So that was the first time that I went to Rwanda.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And, just once you set foot in Rwanda, I'm sure anybody who's watching, who's been there, knows that like once you land in Rwanda, like it becomes a part of you, and you'll want to go back. You'll consider like moving to Rwanda. Some people do, and
Some
so
people
yes, and so now it's just a lifelong journey of learning about Rwanda and just that challenge of like, how can people rebuild trust in each other and in society when they have been through the greatest breach of trust that anyone could ever know, and the greatest trauma that anyone could ever know. And so many remarkable stories, remarkable people, and remarkable character that has come through and become part of sort of like this, national ethos, really.
It's interesting to learn that Kiel, you apparently weren't the only one stalking Carl Wilkins before we had the chance to meet him. But for those of you who might not know, maybe some of our friends in North Macedonia, Carl Wilkins is really famous in our country, in the United States, because he was the only American that actually made the decision to stay in Rwanda during the genocide. When everybody was evacuated and Americans abandoned this genocide, Carl actually made the decision not to. So that's why many of us have tried to learn, how did he have that bravery, and what did he learn from that experience that we need to embody. And I think some of the transitions that come from that, Kiel, is like, so you connect to Rwanda and you see, the possibility, and you see the hope. And then what does that mean to you when you try to now connect it to the world that we have, challenged by COVID, challenged by Black Lives Matter, and youth really kind of thinking that, this is the end versus this is the chance to rebuild. And somehow Rwanda created that mindset. Like, how do you help us, especially as Americans, connect those dots back to what we have ahead of us to fix?
Well, one of the chief lessons from observing Rwanda for me is that a different paradigm is possible. And that if we are creative and bold with our vision of how our institutions should function, the role of memory and dialogue in a society, then you can really flip the script on a lot of the same old dialogues and tropes and prejudices and so forth. And, there's no question that here in the United States, we are really facing so many threats on so many different fronts. I mean, 2020 was a year when we saw, a global pandemic destroying the livelihoods and lives of so many people in the United States, most predominantly people of color and lower income people. And we had rising authoritarianism, threats to democracy, and really another peak in the experience of white supremacy and state violence against Black people in 2020. So we certainly have our work cut out for us. And my thesis, my working thesis, is that we don't get to resolution on these issues unless we really address our history and create a culture of evidence and historical truth and remembrance in this country. And just to cite a statistic that really shows the disparity here, in 2018, the Claims Conference in the field of Holocaust memory came out with a study that found that only 33% of millennials could name Auschwitz as a concentration camp, which was shocking to a lot of people in my field, 33%. But then compare that to a Southern Poverty Law Center survey done the same year in 2018, which found that only 9% of US high school seniors could identify slavery as a primary cause of the Civil War. So that really shows the gap in knowledge. Like, it's no wonder that, in the mainstream, our society has trouble identifying the effects of colonialism and slavery and genocide against indigenous people and mass atrocities, mass incarceration against Black people and people of color, because we don't fully know our history. And the idea is, as Brian Stevenson from Equal Justice Initiative says, it's not about necessarily shaming people into, apologizing and all those sorts of things. It's about creating a society that works better for all of us. This promise of America is something that I think, despite its original sins, can be redeemed for something that brings more justice and equality and equity in the world. And that's kind of what I'm going for here.
And I think, when you say these words, like, can we challenge ourselves and our organizations and our institutions to be both creative and bold? Right? I mean, that, like, we must have enough brain power collectively to solve these problems, right? But we really have to be strong enough to be able to challenge and move forward. and this idea, I think, of like creativity and being bold, like also ties into this this movement and like this next steps, and how we connect each other to move forward. I wonder, Kiel, if you could kind of think through for us, I'll kind of throw a surprising question for you. If you could like draw your wish for how the next steps are taken to build this understanding, and this collective kind of understanding of our history and what steps are taken, like what would you do with your magic wand to make it happen if resources and attitudes and political systems and COVID weren't standing in the way? If it was just as easy as drawing it, what would you draw for us?
I would devote resources toward raising the profile of a restorative justice approach throughout the systems of the United States, the criminal justice system, the education system, human relations commissions, all those sorts of things, because a restorative justice approach, my understanding of it, and I'm not an expert, my friends from Rwanda would be able to speak more practically to this, but it will, amid all this confusion of what do we do and where do we start and how do we help, it is best, I think, to listen to the voices of the people who are at the epicenter of the suffering and the pain and the injustice. Let's see what these people have to say, because in many cases, the ideas and the vision for restoration and repair has already been envisioned. It's just that the institutions, yeah, they aren't listening, and they're not oriented toward marginalized people and historically oppressed people. So if we first tune in and do our best to start from there, then I think we are going to get a lot farther, a lot quicker. So that's just a little tip of the iceberg. But I don't know if you have more questions or if we should go more into that.
Keep going with the magic one. Well, what I would add to it, which is different than what you said, is like, I also think, I mean, you've talked about this idea of collective memory or memory. It doesn't have to necessarily be collective. I also think that a piece of it is like the amplification of these voices and the awareness building of what happened. Or what's happening. Like you told your story about, like, Rwanda is like a 9-year-old. And for me, like, I almost have the same memory. I remember, like, in school sitting there, I think I was 9 or 10 too. And we listened to the radio news, and then we had a test on what you heard on the radio, right? And so they were talking about Rwanda, and my memory of it is like, I can't spell Rwanda on my test. Right? But that, just like you, like, that was enough later in my life to then like trigger, why does this country matter? Why are these lessons that we need to learn in our country? And I think like part of our responsibilities, the things that we've fallen short on in America, and where we have not done our duty, is to also share that information with the world and share these like maybe creative and bold solutions that we'll find, so that then the next country that like risks having those problems, or the kids listening there like hear those words, so then like later they also have this idea that this has happened, what do we learn from? It's not all distinct and separated.
Right. Yeah. And thank you for bringing up the idea of memory, because what is the word remember? It's and membering. It's reintegrating basically that which has been shut out or forgotten or denied. Or it means to, on the positive side of that coin, to keep alive that which has gone on, but which we want to remain part of us. And so when we remember, we take all these experiences and integrate them into our society and our understanding of who we are as people. And if we are honest with ourselves that such great suffering has happened in our own backyard, for example, then we're going to be forced to make a decision of what do we do about that. Because I believe that most people, like Anne Frank said, to paraphrase Anne Frank, like at bottom, I feel like most people are actually decent people, and they're here to get along and protect their families and have a good life. And we have these, the powers, and money and greed and the scarcity mindset, which pits us against each other. And when we remember, we have the opportunity to create more space for a different paradigm to emerge. So that's why I think, restorative justice and these collective memory approaches can really help us usher in a new paradigm that replaces domination with partnership and manipulation and coercion with truth and rational discussion and all these sorts of things.
I guess I've never known in my whole life like exactly what the word remember really means. When you break it down like that, gosh, it just kind of gives like all of the context that we need in like the single word. It doesn't have to become so abstract, and like it's not a thesis. It's really all in this one word if we could just do it justice.
Yeah, and I mean, this is my cosmic woo-woo thesis, Rebecca. This is not like linguistics here. So if there are linguists watching, please chime in and correct me on like the roots of the word
I don't know if
remember.
it's linguists watching, but everybody is hashtagging everything that you say, Kiel. So you have now generated.
That's the new linguistics. That's the new linguistics.
Okay, I feel like I would be so selfish to keep your time forever, although I feel like I learn by every new question I ask you. But let me limit it to one more, Kiel. Okay, so now we've talked about these youth movements. We've talked about some of the amazing people that you're working with and the movements you've contributed to build. What do you say to like the 13-year-old, the 17-year-old who is thinking, I want to make change. I care about these issues. How do they become Kiel?
Oh, well, so I have a lot of advice on this question because I'm still trying to figure it out, Rebecca. So therefore, I'm just like pulling rabbits out of a hat. I don't know. But I will say I kind of want to draw. I thought Andrew Delo gave a great response to this question on Moments with MindLeaps a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to draw on that a little bit, which is to say to young folks, like the sooner and more fully you're able to come out as who you are and be who you are, the better your life will be. And the more happiness and satisfaction you're going to have in your vocation, your calling. And, one thing that I talked about with a teacher who went with us to Rwanda is that this idea that like if you share what you love with the world, others will love it too, and you will teach them how in how you do your thing. And so, that doesn't mean like in America, kids are like, they grow up with this idea like we can be anything. And that's not necessarily like the case for everybody around the world. Like sometimes you just got to do your job to pay the bills, but we can always be like, bring the quality of presence, who we want to be, character matters, and how we treat people matters. And we can do that no matter what our job or function is. And if we just keep honing in on like, why am I here? What is my weird thing that I'm really good at? Then eventually that will be in demand, and that is needed. Whatever it is, your thing, your weird skill, that is needed in this world. And if you bring that to the table, we're all going to be better off. So yeah, you got to hustle, you got to take yourself seriously, be professional, all those sorts of things, but like be bold in your vision for yourself, and keep in mind that for a lot of young people, what you want to do in the world hasn't been done yet. So it's going to feel frustrating that you don't necessarily see how you're supposed to do it, but you just got to keep feeling it out one step at a time and keep moving forward. Stay up, pay attention. There's a million opportunities every single day.
I love the beautiful words you're saying. Like the nugget that really stands out for me is like like the quality of presence. And that is in each and every person, whether or not it's a street kid somewhere or it's somebody with a PhD, the quality of presence is the same. And each person has that. And if you can figure out how to tool that to your dreams, there's no one to tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
Kiel, I am so grateful. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me and with Moments with MindLeaps. I'm going to go back and keep listening to it to improve my vocabulary and my English. And I will leave our guests with the phrase creative and bold, imagining what's possible and believing that it can be done, and knowing that maybe it has been done in some of these countries and with some of our friends already. Kiel,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Well, Rebecca, I just want to say thank you to you. Thank you for founding MindLeaps. Thank you to the MindLeaps team all over the world working so hard for these kids. I mean, it's just one of my favorite organizations in the world, and I really appreciate that you all are working on this and that I get to join with you from time to time.
Well, we all are waiting until you move to Rwanda, Kiel.
Hey, I'm sure, we're crazy, Rebecca, so never say never.
And now we've said it on Instagram, so it has to happen.
There you go. It's recorded.
Okay, Kiel, thank you so much. Okay,
Thanks.
thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.